Nebraska garden. This is Leslie Shallcross with Home Health and Family Development. We're both with UAF Cooperative Extension Service, and today we're going to be talking all about what you need to do to preserve your vegetables for the winter. So we're going to talk about freezing, drying, fermenting, and pickling if we have time. So Leslie's going to be showing us how to do all those things.
Thanks, yeah. So I was thinking about, Heidi said, well, let's talk about all the different things that we can do to preserve what might be in your garden. And I have to say I was really surprised. It seemed like things weren't going, and now there's a whole lot of stuff to harvest, and probably more than I can eat right now. So I had to think about, all right, how do I want to handle these things? As the Health, Home, and Family Development Agent in the Tanana District, we teach a lot of food preservation classes and the principles of food preservation. And so I want to focus on these different methods, and also what will make it successful for you. And there's a couple things that you want to consider when you are preserving food. One, your preserving it isn't going to make it better. So you want to start with fresh, top quality product, and you want to handle it in a way that you know is going to assure that you don't have deterioration from a variety of reasons, but from microorganisms or from enzymes. And we're going to talk through some of these different methods of preserving food and give you some tips.
So if you had some broccoli that had been sitting in your fridge for a few days, and it feels a little bit rubbery, that might not be the best thing to can.
Sure. Your best bet for preserving is to use things as quick as possible. But even if it's a little bit older, as long as it's not deteriorated too much, you can certainly go ahead and freeze it.
Okay.
Or perhaps dry it. Depends on the product exactly what it is. So, but one of the things that you will see called for if you're going to freeze your product, or if you're going to dry your product, is something called blanching. And blanching is done so that it has a couple functions. One is it gets rid of germs. It gets rid of microorganisms that might be on your food. A second thing that it does is it softens the tissues just a little bit, and that kind of helps with drying if you intend to dry it later. And it also kills enzymes that are in the plant that would cause that plant to age. Believe it or not, even if you were freezing your product, those enzymes would continue to work and break down the product. So when we freeze, we blanch. And blanching is a immersion in very hot water, boiling water. Each different vegetable has a specific time that you would use for blanching. And then you're really not trying to cook the product. You want it to be, retain all its good fresh features to the extent possible. So you're not trying to cook it, you're just trying to heat it enough to get rid of those enzymes, and then you're going to put it into ice water and immediately cool it down.
And what about things like zucchini? Zucchini is so moist already. Would you still blanch things like zucchini?
Sometimes, yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
So you want to cut your vegetables up in pretty small pieces, or?
Yeah, well, you want them to be evenly sized. And again, there are instructions for each product, how big you want it to be. With something like broccoli, you've got a fairly dense stem but small flowers, so you probably want to cut off quite a bit of that stem for the blanching.
And how long do you blanch broccoli for?
Well, I would have to look it up.
Probably a couple minutes.
2 to 3 minutes, and we'll see the product change color just a little bit, and that's when it will be ready. So we'll just use a little bit of this.
And when you freeze vegetables, how long do they usually keep in the freezer for?
You know, almost all food preservation, we talk about things keeping for about a year, with a couple exceptions, but vegetables are going to keep well.
Okay.
Yeah. So I'm waiting for this water to boil. A watched pot never boils. Is that what they say? Is that what your mom said, Jeff?
And what if you didn't blanch your vegetables, but you still wanted to freeze them? Would they keep for maybe a month in the freezer?
So if you don't blanch, and I've done some little experiments, like when I had a lot of kale, where I was like, oh, it's in the refrigerator, I'm going away, I know it's going to get bad if I don't do something to it. So I took some and I blanched some, and some of it I just left as it was and stuck it in a bag and put it in. And indeed, the blanched product was much better. The product that wasn't blanched is probably only going to last for a month or so before you're going to see deterioration.
Okay.
Yeah.
So this is almost to a simmer. You want a
Right.
rolling boil before you blanch? In general?
Sure.
Okay.
What I want to do is put it in there and have it come back up to a rolling boil as quickly as possible.
Okay.
So I want it to be good and hot. Maybe we should put a lid on it.
And what would you call this green contraption?
Well, this is a handy little thing that is actually just going to immerse. It was designed to immerse canning jars into but it's doing double time as a colander and strainer that we can put it in. It's not the same thing as this, which would be a steamer basket that we could put on here.
Okay.
You can also steam blanch,
Okay.
but steam blanching doesn't do as good a job.
Okay.
Some people don't want to immerse their product in water because they don't want to lose some of the nutrients. But if you steam blanch, it takes longer, and it also doesn't penetrate the food as well.
Okay.
So I recommend doing it with if you can, with a colander. You don't have to use anything like this. You could just put your product directly into the water and then strain it out into a colander.
Okay.
Yep. Great. All right, we're going for it.
Okay. So you're going to put that in there for a couple minutes.
Hurry up, sink, broccoli. And I'm going to wait until the temperature comes back up. And I'm going to get out my So Easy to Preserve to make sure that I have the right time.
And where can somebody get this book from? What book is this? It's called So Easy to Preserve.
It's called So Easy to Preserve. It's from the National Center for Home Food Preservation at the University of Georgia, and this book can be purchased at Cooperative Extension Service offices or online, or I think they can probably call our communications office.
Yeah, and that's our UAF Cooperative Extension Service. You can order that from. And that's a nice book because it has most recipes for any type of food preservation you want to do: freezing, drying, canning, right?
Yes. So 2 minutes for our broccoli.
Okay.
But it's not up to a boil yet.
Okay.
Gosh darn. So again, this step would be used if we were drying for some products, not all, but for some, and it's definitely used if we're going to freeze a product.
So most vegetables you also have to blanch if you want to dry them as well, but probably not berries.
Some of them. I actually made a few things to dry that didn't require blanching.
Oh, okay. Like carrots maybe, or zucchini?
Carrots you blanch.
Okay.
Zucchini you don't have to blanch, but you could.
Okay.
I did peppers and I did onions. I did do some carrots, but I blanched them.
Okay.
Do you want to see these in the meantime?
Yeah.
While we're waiting
Let's talk about
so
drying
our
while
pot
we're waiting.
doesn't. We're going to stop watching the pot so that it does boil.
Okay, and we need to bring this over here.
So
Here, I'll show the dehydrator.
drying is actually a wonderful way to preserve any number of products.
And this is a pretty serious dehydrator here, right?
It's kind of a serious dehydrator. I want to call it that.
You could do quite a bit
You
here.
can just set it there.
Okay.
So these carrots I cut into about 1/8 of an inch or 3/8 of an inch thick, and here's how they are when and I blanched them, and I also peeled them. Some people don't realize that. Again, most people like to keep the skins because they are aware that there's extra nutrients there. But with most food preservation, it's a good idea to peel to get rid of the dirt and the mold and other things that are on the outside. But I blanched these, and believe it or not, they looked like little round carrot discs about that big.
And they covered the dehydrator when you put it in?
Yep, I put them in here carefully so they didn't touch each other. And here's how they look today. And this, I don't know. Be careful. You might want to see.
How thin did you slice them?
3/8.
Okay.
Yeah. So a little less than 1/2 of an inch thick.
And how long were they in the dehydrator?
So these were in the dehydrator for 8 hours. And when you dry vegetables, and it's a little bit different for fruit, but when you dry vegetables, you want them to be very crispy. You don't want any moisture in them.
So these would be great for backpacking or adding to soups later.
Yeah,
or
some
saving
people.
space in your freezer.
Yep, some people just like to have them because basically they just need to be rehydrated. You could put them into a soup or a stew, that kind of thing, or you could make up your own dried soup mix and it would be ready to go. Same thing with people like to do easy. People like to do onions, and the nice thing about I love the way the house smells when I'm doing the onions. So they also got nice and crisp and dry. And I did. Where are they? They're hiding. The peppers.
And do these plastic sheets that you have on here, are these the only things you need to wash usually? Just the plastic sheets?
I wash the whole thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
And are there different size holes, or are they all the same?
Those, that's the only thing that I've seen for these dehydrators.
Okay.
I mean, there are plastic sheets that you can use for making fruit leather, but you need to have something for these. In order for them to get dry, you really need to have air coming through.
Right.
The peppers got pretty crispy too, and you can see they were all in the dehydrator about 8 hours. So this one I was a little bit sloppy, and I had cut it a little thicker, and so it's still wet on a piece of it. So we can turn this back on and finish drying that out.
And if you don't have a dehydrator, you can also do it in the oven, is that right?
You could do it in the oven. It's a little more complicated to do it in the oven and probably not very energy efficient. You can do it in the oven. The temperature for drying most things is around 140 degrees, 140, 145. And if you've looked at your oven thermostat, is it boiling yet?
Not quite.
What's going on there? Okay, so your oven thermostat doesn't go down that low. So set it as low as possible. You would prop your oven door open and put a thermometer in there and see what the temperature was. And you should be able to bring it down to 140, 150. Ideally, you will also have a fan set up that moves air across it. Dehydrating well requires air moving to take the moisture out.
Okay.
How's that?
Great.
So,
And how much is a dehydrator like this usually?
I bought this a while ago, but one of this size, and a couple of things about this, it does have a fan, and it does have a thermostat, so I can adjust the temperature. I think this is about $250.
Okay.
So it's a big investment. It's pretty energy efficient, so you're not using a lot of power when you run it.
Yeah.
So.
Okay, great.
Yeah.
I'm going to show this one.
If you want to. There are smaller ones that you can buy. You may have seen them. There are also bigger ones that you can get.
Okay.
That range in price anywhere from $300 to $600. That have more temperature controls, or they might have an automatic turn off. So I can set one. I have one that I can set for 3 or 4 hours and have it turn off, or 8 hours and have it turn off.
Yeah.
It sounds like it's boiling. What about those broccolis? They're floating. Okay. So what next?
So let's talk a little bit about fermenting.
Okay. So you want to see some? Want to see it in action?
Yeah.
All right. Uh-oh. I'm in another big bowl. So.
This bowl?
It's gotta be bigger than that. Can you still see it? So I did bring a couple things that I fermented, and you might find this unusual, although a lot of people are quite interested in fermentation. But I was really happy when I discovered fermenting in small quantities, like a quart jar. A lot of people think if they're going to ferment, they've got to have a big crock and a lot of equipment. And you can very easily ferment and do something like sauerkraut, and it's ready. It doesn't take weeks or months. It's ready in maybe a week and a half to 2. So what makes fermentation work, and what can you ferment easily? Cabbage, as in sauerkraut, is something that ferments really well. You've got a lot of moisture, and you've also got a little bit of carbohydrate for the bacteria to get going on. So cabbage works really well. I fermented some red radishes. Yeah.
So that's all red radishes in there.
That is.
Is it pretty spicy?
You could try it if you want. It tastes like a radish.
Yeah.
It's a little hot. And then I fermented some carrots. So why would you ferment? Well, again, you might ferment some things that you did not otherwise have storage for. The radishes, they're going to deteriorate pretty fast, right? You may or may not have an ability to keep them. Carrots, we know that they'll keep for a long time, but again, you might not have room. Perfect. Might not have room in your refrigerator to keep them. You might not have a root cellar where you can keep them. You might not want to dehydrate them and turn them into teensy little bits. So fermentation could be a way to use your carrots or radishes or cabbage.
Well, it's also a unique taste too, so you might want to do it just because you like how something tastes.
It's also a unique taste, and most people are thinking about fermentation these days because they've heard a lot about the benefits of having the microorganisms that help that do the fermentation. So you may want to have some just so you can get some of those probiotics. Probiotics are not just in yogurt. They're also in your sauerkraut.
And can you ferment any vegetable?
Some work well and some do not work well. Things like cabbage and some of the other plants that are in that family, although probably not broccoli so much. Radishes or a daikon radish, turnips do well. One of my favorite things to ferment, which I didn't bring with me today, is rutabaga. Have you tried that?
No.
It's amazing.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, it's amazing. You just shred it and add the same proportions of salt that you would add with the cabbage.
So how would you go about fermenting or making sauerkraut?
Let me show you. So, what's going to make your fermentation work? Well, again, fresh is best. What makes it work? Are we boiling yet?
Simmering.
Almost. So what makes it work? Again, you don't want to have old bad product. The best fermentation is going to happen with a spanking fresh, right out of the garden cabbage. I've taken this cabbage. You can see conveniently I've already sliced it.
Did you slice that by hand or food processor?
Did.
Okay.
I did. Yeah. So I'm going to do a magic trick now.
Okay.
And it's going to involve putting this cabbage into a single quart jar.
Wow.
Yeah. So what makes it work? Again, having a good fresh cabbage. You're going to take away any of the bad leaves. Sometimes the outside of it's got a little bit of damaged portions to it. So you're going to take those out. You're then going to use very clean equipment. You can put, some people would say to sanitize it with bleach. You're good if you wash it thoroughly and maybe even put a little boiling water on your container. Then you are going to, well, I don't know. They can tell this isn't a quart jar and they'll think I'm lying here. So you're going to slice your product pretty thinly. And we say, if we're talking about sauerkraut and cabbage, we want to slice it so that it's not any thicker than the width of a quarter. So pretty thin slices. And when I get done, I kind of pick through there and make sure I don't have a lot of fat pieces. That piece is kind of fat because we want them to ferment at about the same rate, right? And then where is? We didn't get out the tablespoon or the scale, but they'll just have to believe me. Where are my tablespoons? one of the things that, so the way fermentation works is that you have natural microorganisms. They're everywhere, right?
Mm-hmm.
We got them on our skin, we got them on our hands. They're on the vegetables when they come out of the garden. And when we ferment, we're going to use salt to, in the right proportion. Hey, it's already turned on. Okay, so you want to use a food scale of some sort to make sure that you've got the right proportions. And if you look at, I'm going to grab that sauerkraut publication.
Okay.
It should be green.
Sure.
Out on the wall. You want to make sure you have the right proportions of salt to your product, and this will be the same for all your vegetables. So for this, because we're going to do this in a small volume, we're going to use our instructions for making sauerkraut not boiling. Who's watching this pot? Stop watching. Okay, so the burners here are not very strong. I'm gonna wait. So the right proportion of salt makes a difference. The right kind of salt makes a difference. We recommend for any food preservation that you're doing that you use canning salt, and canning salt is just plain salt. It has no additives in it. I'm sorry that we can't say go ahead and use nice sea salt, because I like cooking with that. But when you're preserving, you want to use plain salt that has no additives in it, because the iodine that you might get from regular table salt, or even the minerals that you might get from sea salt, might affect your product. They're not going to make it dangerous, but they're going to potentially give it an off flavor, a bitter flavor.
What about kosher salt?
You know, kosher salt, and our publications even say to use kosher salt. I prefer not to use it because it has an anti-caking agent in it, which can make the liquid in a product cloudy.
Oh, okay.
When we're looking at canned goods, these are some things that I canned yesterday. You don't want it. If I was looking at this and deciding whether to eat it or not, I would say, well, is the top good? You know, is there still a seal on it? Does the color of the product look good? And I would say, how about the liquid in there? Because if the liquid is cloudy, this might be able to see a little better. This is pretty clear. That means that you probably don't have microorganisms in there. If it's cloudy, you're like, what's going on in that jar?
And that's for ones that you've actually pressure canned, or ones that you've fermented too, for both. You don't
well, when you're fermenting, the liquid's going to kind of take on
it's going to be cloudy anyway.
Yeah, it's going to have a little bit of cloudiness.
So those ones were pressure canned.
Yeah. But that's why you're using plain salt that doesn't have anything else in it. All right. So we have to do some math here, Heidi. Okay. So when we're making, when we're using 5 pounds of cabbage, we're using 3.5 tablespoons of salt for 5 pounds. This is about 2.5 pounds. How much salt do I need? Because I need the exact right amount.
Let's see, that would be 7 tablespoons. Oh, sorry, for 2.5. That would be
3 teaspoons equals a tablespoon.
1 3/4 teaspoons. Tablespoons.
1 3/4 tablespoons. You say so. All right.
Okay.
So fresh product, the right salt, clean equipment, and we're also going to make sure that we have the right proportion of salt to the product. And this makes a difference because back to those microorganisms, the salt helps to limit the microorganisms that we don't want, and it actually helps to promote the ones that we do want. So, we want to use the right proportion. Otherwise, we might get a product that, well, it would be too salty, for one thing. For another thing, we might get the wrong types of microorganisms. Okay, so the next important step here, got our pieces cut, but the next important step is to make sure all that salt that I just sprinkled in there gets evenly distributed. Because it could be sitting in one spot and not in another, okay? And so I'm going to mix it around and make sure it gets evenly distributed. When you're making fermented products, you want to make sure that you are using equipment and containers that can endure that salt.
Yeah.
Some things can't. And you most likely don't want to use metal equipment if you can avoid it. This is a food grade plastic container.
So
and
can
it
you
could be
ferment in this
anything.
container?
I could ferment in this container.
Because it's food
As long
grade.
as I had something that, as long as I had something that would keep the cabbage kind of under the brine.
But glass or a type of crock would
Glass
be another
or
good
a crock.
alternative.
What do you think?
I think it's
Two.
wedged.
It's 2. All right. So the next step is that. Hold your horses. Okay. So I'm just going to put some water in there.
So you can set it away briefly.
All right.
So you're taking
So
the
this was-
broccoli out of the hot water, and it was probably blanching a little longer than
Then it needed to be.
you wanted.
Right. Yeah, so you don't have to have ice, but you do have to have, if you're going to do it properly and you're going to have the best quality product, you want to get that take it out of your pot and get it into cold water as fast as possible.
Okay.
And this would be, especially important if you were freezing for best quality. When we freeze things, it changes the texture. It makes them a little mushy, so we don't want to contribute to any additional mushiness.
So you want to cool it down, and then you want
Yeah.
to get some of the moisture out of the broccoli too. Is that right?
Yes. So one thing that I would do if I was going to freeze this is that I would probably do kind of a freezer pack where I put these pieces of broccoli. I don't want to freeze them in a big lump, right?
So you freeze them on a cookie sheet or a tray first.
Yeah. So I would tray freeze it, and
just kind of dab it with a paper towel to get some of that moisture off first.
yeah.
And then do you freeze it in a Ziploc bag or vacuum pack or?
I would probably not vacuum pack broccoli. Something that would maybe peas or beans or something like that was a little sturdier. But again, the reason that I'm tray freezing this is that I want these to be individual pieces.
Mm-hmm.
So if I was freezing a quart or a half gallon of this.
Mm-hmm.
I would want these to be individual pieces so I could take out what I needed when I needed it,
Okay.
right? So I probably wouldn't use a food saver, which is going to smash them,
Okay.
right?
Yeah.
However, you do want to make sure, however you do take care of it, you might put it into a bag. Make sure that you're using a freezer bag, something that says it's for a freezer. Or if you were using plastic containers, I had some. You go to the grocery store, you're going to see all these different containers, but you want to make sure that you get one that says freezer grade on it. Some of them will have like a little tiny snowflake on them that tells you that they can go into the freezer. The wrong type of plastic is likely to break.
Oh, okay.
Right? So if we were gonna do this, I'd put these into the freezer just until they got kind of frozen and weren't going to end up sticking to each other. Okay, and then we'd bring them back. Oh, there we go. Take-alongs. Let's see here. Not advertising. Somewhere on here. So you can't see this probably, but on the bottom here, it shows you that it's got the little snowflakes. You can put it in a freezer, and it actually says freezer, and it can be put in the microwave, and it's BPA free.
Okay, great.
I know a lot of people don't like to use plastic, and I'm supportive of not using a lot of plastic, but in the case of the freezer, it takes up less space, it protects your product, and it does protect it well. The reason that I recommend using the freezer plastic bags is that they are thicker plastic and more suitable for the freezer. The wrong type of plastic will crack and break, and even glass will get fragile in a freezer and it will break. So that's not necessarily a good thing to put in the freezer.
Yeah, you got to be careful when you use glass in the freezer.
Right.
Especially with liquids.
Yeah.
Make sure you don't overfill them.
Right. Okay, back to our sauerkraut. I don't know if you can see this, but the salt that we put on there is already drawing moisture.
Really a lot more moist, isn't it?
You know why? This is really fresh cabbage. If you were using cabbage that was, you got it at the grocery store and it wasn't real super fresh, you might add just a little bit of sugar in there to provide some extra fuel for your
or cabbage that had been in your root cellar for a few months, that would not have as much moisture.
Right. This was quite a dense head. And those pieces are kind of stuck together there, and I want to make sure they get all come in contact with that salt. And I'm just crushing it a little bit as I go. You may again, if you had a grandmother who made big vats of sauerkraut, she might have had a pounding tool of some sort, but you really don't need special equipment. Like I said, I just cut this with a knife.
Okay.
If I was doing 25 pounds, well, I'd probably invite you over to help me, because that would be a lot. But,
do you add any spices, or is it just salt? Can you add spices, or can you mix in other vegetables?
Yeah, you sure can. You had asked about what things ferment well. So something that you might have a lot of would be something like kale or some other greens. They don't ferment real well, but you could mix them in with some cabbage, or I showed you I've got some carrots here, and these carrots I put some cumin seed in.
Oh, okay.
It gives them a nice flavor. We don't have a lot of research on home fermented foods, and people are very excited about it and trying to do lots of different things with it. Just stick to that proportion of salt.
And what about, I've heard some people add whey too. Do you recommend adding any whey?
Well, whey is going to do the same thing that adding a little bit of sugar. It's going to give it a little bit of food. The bacteria that are the fermenters that we want are called lactobacillus. They're lactic acid producing bacteria, and so putting a little whey in there can be a good substrate for them and good food for them, but it's not necessary.
Okay.
It's a very natural process, and it works really well.
Yeah. And you don't even need to buy things like starter cultures. I've seen a lot of starter cultures for sale.
You don't need starter cultures. I did experiment with them a little bit, and I can't say that my products were a lot different, except they all tasted the same. You know, the things that ferment are a combination of microorganisms, and so if you use a starter culture, you're putting in specific microorganisms, and they're going to do what they're supposed to do. So.
And that will save some money if you don't have to buy the starter cultures. Those can,
for sure.
Can be a little spendy.
Oh, for sure. Yeah, no, definitely not. Definitely not. These lactic acid producing bacteria are everywhere. So, okay.
So you want to just harness what's there in the air in the vegetables.
Yeah. So. I'm going to let that sit for another couple minutes.
Okay.
Let me just talk a little bit about pickling.
Okay.
Because the same thing that preserves our vegetables when we ferment is what's preserving when we pickle. It's acid. So when we ferment, those bacteria that I were talking about produce acids. And if we've got the right ones in here and we've handled it properly and we've given them the right temperature, the right bacteria are going to be producing lactic acid. Hopefully we don't have too many other bacteria, because there can be a mix. Some of them will produce alcohols. Some of them will produce acetic acid, which is more vinegary tasting. So anyway. When we pickle, we are also taking advantage of the preservation provided by acid. And I made a couple pickles for us just for purposes of discussion. You can, again, I was thinking, all right, what might people have in their gardens? You might have had a bumper crop of beans, and you might not want to freeze them, which does involve blanching. You might have thought, we'll do some pickles. So pickling is, generally speaking, a very simple process of creating a brine or a pickling solution. Most instructions are going to call for using white vinegar. If you use brown vinegar, what about that liquid in the jar? It's brown, it doesn't look as good. Maybe a little confusing. There's nothing wrong with, using a apple cider brown vinegar, but you do need to.
Quite as pretty.
Well, and it certainly will have a distinctive flavor. White vinegar has a pretty neutral flavor. But what you do need to make sure is that you have a vinegar that has 5% acidity. That's what our recipes count on. So you're not going to use. I wouldn't use a homemade vinegar or maybe a rice vinegar that's a little milder. It's not going to have that same acid.
And vegetables are naturally low acidic. Is that why you always need to pickle them or pressure can them versus with
Correct.
berries, they're a little
Right.
more acidic, so you don't need
Right.
to add that acid.
Right. So with pickles, pickles are able to be done in a boiling water bath canner. Which is really nothing more than a pot that's big enough to put your jars in with a rack on the bottom, so they're not sitting right on the bottom, and that has enough room that you can have 1 inch to 2 of rapidly boiling water over the tops of the jars, and a lid. And you want that lid, and you want that 1 to 2 inches of water over the top to make sure that the heat is even, and you're not missing anything. So, yeah. What else would you like to know about pickling?
So when you make your brine, is it called, that you add to your vegetables, are you mixing in water usually, or spices?
So this particular recipe called for vinegar and water, basically, and then I put some spices in it. I put some a little bit of dill seed, a little bit of the head of some dill I had out in my yard. It called for a head, which I think is one of these. I put a few in because I like it. And I put some garlic in there, and I put some pepper in there. So that one was a pretty simple, and I cut the beans to the right size, put them into the jar with those spices. And
your spices and herbs you can experiment with. Those don't really add much food preservation value.
They are not adding much food preservation value.
They're more flexible.
They are more flexible.
The acidic solution, you need to have, make sure your solution is more acidic, right?
Yes. And that's the critical point.
Okay.
You got to have the right amount of acid added to the product.
Mm-hmm.
This, and when you said you could be flexible with it, so this was a recipe for pickling Brussels sprouts.
Oh, okay.
Or cauliflower, and it also calls for some onions, and it calls for some pepper, and you can't just say, oh, the pepper is going to give it flavor, and I'm going to put as much in as I want, or as much onion as. You can't change that volume or proportion of non-acid product to the pickling solution, right?
Okay.
So I had to keep those the same. I did substitute a little bit of hot pepper for some of the red pepper, but no more than the volumes that were called for in the recipe. The other things like there's mustard seed in there, that you could adjust as you like, or you could I could have added just a pickling spice mix.
And then how long do they need to be in the hot water bath for?
It depends on the product. Depends on the product.
Okay.
Yeah.
So look at the So Easy to Preserve book for the
the
various processing
and
types.
I do want to point out again, these things would be risky if we were not following published recipes that tell us the exact proportions of vinegar to the product in the jar. So I've just come back from the state fair where I was the judge for canning, and a lot of people want to make up their own recipes, and I have to say to them, sorry, we can't take that in the fair because it's potentially not safe. So stick with the research-based recipes. Yes, stick with research-based recipes. There's another book, and I would get the most current version, the Ball canning book.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
And there's another one that's a USDA guide that pretty much has exactly the same things in here. But make sure you get current ones, and make sure you get tested recipes before you try and do any canning.
Okay.
All right. Well, I told you I was going to do some magic, that I was going to put this in a quart jar, but we'll just have to go with
gallon size jar.
Half gallon, a 2-quart jar. It's okay. So This is funny because I usually do not use purple cabbage, and this smells different.
It looks
feels,
different.
Yeah, and it looks different. So as you're putting your product in the jar, you want to squash it down as much as you can.
Look at all that water.
Yeah, and you can see the juice is coming out. But you want to squash it down because, one, to get that juice out, but two, because your fermentation takes place in an airless environment. So we want to get all that air out of the container.
Sometimes people use the pounder for what you're using your fist for.
Yes. Right? Yeah. In fact, many people have looked at me and said, you know, I've got some arthritis. I don't think I'm going to do that.
Yeah.
Or they say, wait a minute, your hand is smaller than my hand.
And then you're gonna let that sit on your counter for a week or two, or longer if you wanted, or how long?
So you want to find a place where once we've got it packed in there and covered appropriately, you want to find a place where you are going to have what for us in Alaska might be relatively warm temperatures in our house. I end up putting mine in a closet that backs up to my hot water heater. Because you need to have, in order for the bacteria to go that you want to have get going, you want to have a temperature, I've taken it as low as 68, but somewhere probably above 68 and below 78.
Okay.
Yeah. If it's too hot, your product's going to be bad, and if it's too cold, your product's going to be bad too. The microorganisms will not get going fast enough, and you might have the wrong ones getting going, and you'll have spoilage of your product. It's also somewhat important to keep that temperature fairly stable, especially at the beginning. See, it would have fit in a quart jar. The magic trick.
And does it need to be in a dark location, or?
Not in the sun. I would put it someplace where there wasn't a lot of direct light on it for sure.
And then after it's fermented, then what do you do with it?
Well, first of all, we missed a couple steps.
Oh, okay.
Okay. One of the things that you need to do after you get it into the jar is, and one of the reasons why it's good to do this in a quart jar is that this will come right up to the top of my quart jar, right about here. And usually what I will do at that point is take a small baggie filled with brine and put it right on top of that to create that airless environment. I'm going to make sure you can see here that we've got liquid, this brine on top, and we want to make sure that I love that purple.
That's pretty.
I hope it stays that color. I had purple beans in here, and they did not stay purple. Thought it was going to be beautiful. Maybe they'll come back. I don't know. Anyway, so you want to have that liquid on top because we want to have an airless environment. And if I had a little baggie, hey, I've got baggies. I would use one that was a little more flexible. So what I would do with this, which I'll kind of demo here, is that I would put that on top, and I would fill that with water. If you are familiar with fermenting and the big crock, usually you put something on top of your product to hold it under the liquid so that it's in a relatively airless environment. And this works to do this. And what I would do after putting that in there, I would fill it with brine. You don't want to fill it with water, you would fill it with brine because just in case you got a leak in there, you don't want to, remember we were talking about that proportion of salt, you don't want to change that proportion of salt, and if we had a bunch of water leaking in there, it would change that. So
you do want to fill it with brine.
You would fill the baggie with brine.
Okay.
Okay? And that would create your airless environment. You can see, maybe you can see it better on this one. So this bag's a little bit, this bag's too big. So we would have made up some brine ahead of time with water and salt. And I would have put it on there. And then, then I could close it with this if I wanted to. I wouldn't have to. There's going to be gas coming out of the jar and liquid coming out of the jar. So, and you don't want to close that off altogether, but you do want to, like I said, keep that airless environment. And yeah.
Great.
Yeah. So what do you do when it's ready? So I said that if you ferment like this, and if you've got, I would recommend, again, that slightly higher than 68, or I don't know, how warm do you keep your house?
About there.
Could be, I often keep my house colder than that, but if I, it will be ready. This actually I made a few weeks ago, and it is, well, I thought it was plenty sour enough, and so this is, I had already put this in the refrigerator. I could have left it going, but people always say, well, how do I know if it's ready? Well, it's ready if it's sour. If it's ready if it's sour in the way you want it. I don't know if you want to taste that or not. I would have let that go a little bit longer, but I was going out of town, so I just put it right in the refrigerator.
It's good.
Yeah. With the another way that you would be able to tell whether it was done is that the sauerkraut or the cabbage changes color. It's opaque when you start, and it becomes more and more translucent as you go. So at that point, I still try and push it down and make sure that there's liquid covering it, but just put it into the refrigerator, and it'll keep for months.
Or a root cellar if you had a root cellar too, right?
Or a root cellar. You would, I don't know what temperature your root cellar is. I know they can be different temperatures depending upon where exactly it is.
Yeah.
But for best keeping, it should be below 50.
Okay, great.
I had some kimchi in my garage that was 45 to 50 degrees, and it was kept quite well for 5 months before I thought, maybe I should stop serving this to people.
And in a larger container, it probably keeps a little bit longer, is that true, than in a smaller container?
It probably does.
Okay.
Yeah.
Great.
Yeah. All right, did we finish that?
Yeah, I think
yeah,
that's good.
And again, you can do all sorts of things. Still some gas going in there. I think we got more of the alcohol producing microorganisms in there.
More sugar.
Yeah.
In the carrots.
So, we're talking about fermentation, and obviously we all know of other things that are fermented. When you're fermenting fruits or something like this where you have more carbohydrate or more sugar, you are often going to have some of those microorganisms that produce alcohol. They're producing acid, but they're also producing alcohol, and that tastes a little alcohol-y to me. It's not just the cumin seed that I put in there.
Yeah. So. I like the cumin flavoring.
Mm-hmm.
And this one just had salt added, and this one as
Yes,
well.
Just salt.
That's good.
What do you think?
It's not too spicy. I would have imagined it would be spicier.
Right.
I think the fermentation mellowed the flavor a little
Yeah,
bit.
yeah. So turnips, cabbage, carrots, radishes, and don't forget the rutabaga. Really good to ferment.
Yeah, I'll have to try that.
What else?
Whew.
I know.
think that's about it, Leslie.
I know, now we're too tired to do any canning.
Yeah, this has been great. So we've talked about blanching, freezing, drying, fermenting, pickling, and pressure canning. So all the different things you can do with your vegetables at the end of the summer. So now it's time to get busy and get your vegetables stored up so you can eat them all winter. And here at Cooperative Extension Service, it's Leslie Shallcross. I'm Heidi Rader, serving primarily the Tanana Chiefs Conference region, and Leslie serves a similar interior Alaska and Fairbanks. So lots of publications here at Cooperative Extension Service, and we're here to help too. So thanks for joining. I'm Heidi Rader here in the Alaska Garden, and we'll catch you next time.